I respect that, and I hear that. I guess the question is, to your point now about Jordan, and I'm not trying to cast aspersion specifically on him, a lot of athletes who have been all-stars in their particular sport, and yet the names you mentioned, with all due respect to these individuals, they're not world champions necessarily. They're not iconic figures in the world of sport. They're not the ones getting the multi-million-dollar sneaker contracts. Assess for me then those persons who we do know who choose not to say, not to do, and do they have to step out like Ali did?
No, they certainly don't have to. And that's one of the things I argue in the book, is that if an athlete wants to be political, that should be their choice. And my concern is that far too many athletes feel that they sign away their right to have opinions when they sign that contract. I think we've gone too far in the other direction. Certainly people like Charles Barkley speaks his mind. Like he likes to say, he said, well, I used to be a Republican until the Republicans lost their minds, you know, and he says all kinds of fun things like that. But that's Charles. He's almost in his own category, in his own world. But as far as great athletes today, one of the problems is that young athletes, young superstars, they become professionalized and isolated at such an early age. I mean, basically, they're starting to recruit kids when they're in the fetus, for goodness sakes. And when you have somebody who's been identified, like, say, a LeBron James, as a potential superstar when they're 7, 8, 9 years old, they're a whole set of intellectual muscles that just don't get developed as they get older. But let's take LeBron as an example, because he said something in an interview which I found very interesting, which shows the potential. He said that he had 2 goals in his life. One was to be a global icon like Muhammad Ali, and the other was to be the richest athlete in the history of the world. Now, to me, that provides an opening to have a real dialogue with LeBron, with people around LeBron, to say, well, let's talk about history for a second. Let's talk about why Ali is beloved throughout the world. It's not because of his bank account, but because of what he sacrificed.
I accept that, because my concern with the LeBron, who I love, is that you can't start at the end.
Right.
You know, Ali didn't do what he did because he wanted to be beloved around the world.
Right.
There was no guarantee when he told the U.S., United States of America, I am not going to Vietnam to fight. There was no guarantee that he'd end up being the kind of iconic figure he became. That was 5 years of not fighting.
Yeah. That was not a way to become a global brand.
Exactly.
To say I'm not going to Vietnam.
All right, so we talk about Ali and a number of other athletes in a contemporary sense. Who would be, since the book is called A People's History of Sports in the United States, not black sports in the United States, who would be the white equivalent closest to Ali in sport?
Well, the white equivalent of Muhammad Ali in sports. That's a terrific
I mean, where
question.
your book is concerned.
Oh, okay.
At this intersection of politics and sport.
Right. I mean, I'll have to go with a white female and say Billie Jean King.
Okay, that's what I want to get to.
Yeah, because with Billie Jean King, you have somebody who was the founder of the first ever women's tennis union. She was a person, of course, she's best known for the Bobby Riggs Battle of the Sexes match in the early 1970s at the Houston Astrodome, which is still one of the most watched television programs in history. But what I like about Billie Jean King was that she's somebody who actually took it to the street. She wasn't content to be a symbolic political figure, like, say, a Jack Johnson, for example, or the great first African-American heavyweight boxing champion, or a Babe Didrikson, who was a female superstar athlete in the first part of the 20th century. These were symbolic political figures for what they accomplished on the field of play. Billie Jean King took it to the streets, and she marched for things like Title IX to make sure that women had equal representation in the world of sports. And if I was creating a sports politics Mount Rushmore, without question, in addition to Ali, you would have Billie Jean King, not to mention people like Bill Russell and Jim Brown and Martina Navratilova, for that matter.
I accept all of that. Exit question. I could do this all day. It's a great book. What is the lesson for everyday people who read the book, everyday people who buy the book? Because most of us are never going to be iconic sports figures, but I assume there's a lesson you want us to take from their lives.
Absolutely. I want people to take the lesson that sports and politics do not exist in different worlds, and we shouldn't accept that. I mean, we're taught that just like you have ESPN over here and C-SPAN over there, that sports and politics are just in different universes. But people have to know that whether you're a sports fan or not, sports really does affect our lives, whether we're talking about publicly funded billion-dollar stadiums, or whether we're talking about the values that are taught to our kids, or whether we're talking about a society that has an obesity epidemic precisely because you're either a spectator or a player, and there's this sharp divide that has not always existed in this country. And I think if we know our history, then we're able to challenge sports to change, and I think that would be to the betterment of all of us.
Just a taste of why Dave Zirin is now regarded as one of the best young sports writers in the country. His new book is called A People's History of Sports in the United States. Dave, congrats. Nice to have you on.
Oh, my privilege. Thank you.